It was supposed to be just another uneventful shift for Officer Rick Lawson. The late-night patrol had already stretched into hours of monotonous nothing, and the streets were empty save for the occasional car passing by. He didn't expect much when he parked near the corner store, his hand resting on the steering wheel as the soft hum of the engine kept him company. But everything changed when she walked by. Her name was Evelyn Clark. She was on her way home after a late shift, her worn sneakers barely making a sound on the cracked pavement as she approached the crosswalk. Her tired eyes flicked up briefly, catching sight of the squad car, but she didn't think much of it. She had seen officers around here before, and they'd never been a concern. Officer Lawson, however, saw it differently. He had been watching her since she turned the corner. Something about the way she walked, almost like she had a chip on her shoulder, rubbed him the wrong way. It wasn't her clothes, nor her expression, but the way she carried herself as if she had no fear. To him, that was a threat. When Evelyn stopped at the crosswalk, preparing to cross the street, Officer Lawson had already stepped out of his car. Without hesitation, he moved toward her, his heavy boots making loud, deliberate steps. "You! Stop right there," Lawson barked. Evelyn turned, her face displaying no immediate sign of fear, only confusion. She had been stopped by officers before, but it had always been because of a legitimate reason. This, though, seemed different. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked, her voice even, though a slight edge of irritation had crept in. Officer Lawson didn't like her tone. He was the law, and to him, she was just another civilian who thought they could speak to him however they wanted. Without a word, he moved toward her, his hand raised and, slap. The sound echoed through the empty street as his palm connected with her cheek. The force of the hit was unexpected, shocking, and in that split second, Lawson realized he had made a grave mistake. Evelyn stood there, her head tilting slightly as the sting of the slap burned against her skin. Her expression didn't change, though. She didn't shout or retaliate. She simply stood, her gaze locked on the officer. It was as if time had slowed for both of them, each processing what had just happened in different ways. For a moment, everything seemed frozen. Officer Lawson's hand lingered in the air, still hanging in the aftermath of his hasty action. His heart raced as the weight of what he had just done began to settle in. Evelyn, though, stood perfectly still, her face a picture of calm defiance. There was no outburst, no immediate response. That calmness unnerved him more than anything. "Do you have a problem with me, officer?" She finally spoke, her voice steady and unshaken. Lawson stood there, stunned. He had expected a reaction, a cry, an outburst, anything. But she didn't give him the satisfaction. Instead, she turned and began to walk away. But Lawson wasn't done. He quickly regained his senses, stepping forward to block her path. "Where do you think you're going?" he demanded, his tone now laced with frustration. Evelyn didn't look at him. She didn't need to. She kept walking, her pace unhurried, as if she had done nothing wrong. He followed her for a few steps, then stopped, suddenly aware of what this could mean. This was no ordinary slap. Something about her quiet confidence was gnawing at him, reminding him that she wasn't going to be the one to let this go. Behind him, Lawson's radio crackled to life, but he ignored it, his focus locked on Evelyn as she turned the corner and vanished into the night. The incident had happened in seconds, but its weight felt like hours, pressing down on him. And he wasn't the only one who would feel its effects. His radio crackled again, louder this time, but he was too late. The next few minutes felt like an eternity for Officer Lawson. His heart was still pounding in his chest as he slowly turned back toward his squad car, hoping that maybe, just maybe, it could all be written off as a mistake, something that could be buried under the weight of his badge. But deep down, he knew it was too late. The radio crackled again, this time with more urgency. "Officer Lawson, report immediately. We have a situation." He didn't want to respond. He didn't want to acknowledge the growing pit in his stomach. But he knew better. He grabbed the radio, his fingers trembling slightly, and spoke. "This is Officer Lawson, I copy. What's the situation?" The dispatcher's voice came through, clear and cold. "We've just received a report from a local business owner. A woman just filed a complaint. Says you struck her." Lawson's stomach dropped. His mind raced, flashing back to the slap, to Evelyn's stoic expression. No. This couldn't be happening. I need to report to the station. "I'll be there in a few minutes," he said, his voice suddenly strained. "Officer Lawson, don't leave the scene. We're sending backup." Lawson froze. He knew what this meant. The backup wasn't for his protection. It was to ensure that he was escorted in. The consequences of his actions had already begun to ripple outward, and they weren't going to stop here. As he stood there, staring out into the dark street, he could feel the weight of it all. The system he worked for, one he had trusted, had been part of for so long, was now turning its back on him. And he couldn't blame it. He had crossed a line. 4 minutes. 4 minutes had passed since the slap, and his career had just started to unravel. It was as though the world had tilted on its axis. Officer Lawson stood frozen on the corner, his grip tightening around the radio. He couldn't stop hearing Evelyn's voice in his head, so calm, so unshaken. He had expected an explosion, an argument, maybe even a threat. But none of that had come. Instead, she had simply walked away. His hand hovered over the squad car door handle, but before he could open it, the radio crackled once again. "Officer Lawson, we've got a bigger problem." His heart skipped a beat. This wasn't just about the slap anymore. "What's going on?" Lawson responded, his voice now tight with apprehension. "This is coming straight from the top," the dispatcher continued, a slight tremor in their voice now. "We've got internal people on this. She's filing a formal complaint. And it's not just the slap. She's got video footage." Lawson's blood ran cold. "Video?" he repeated, as if hearing the word would somehow make it less real. How does she have video?" "Apparently, she's been recording for a while. Maybe she knew something like this could happen. I don't know, but it's been sent to HQ already. This is bad, Lawson." The realization hit him like a brick. Evelyn hadn't just been walking away from the scene, she had been documenting it. She had seen the injustice, recorded it, and now the whole world was about to see it too. His hands clenched into fists, and he slammed them against the squad car's roof in frustration. He had just crossed a line he would never be able to uncross. "Stay on the scene, Officer Lawson," the dispatcher's voice crackled one last time. "Backup will be there soon. We need you to follow their instructions carefully." But Lawson wasn't listening anymore. His mind raced, the weight of his actions sinking in. He thought of the years he'd put into this career, the reputation he had built, the respect he thought he commanded. And now, it was all unraveling in a matter of minutes. He couldn't shake the image of Evelyn's unflinching gaze. There was something about her, something he hadn't understood then, but he realized now. She had been in control all along. The lights of the squad car flickered in the distance as Officer Lawson stood alone, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. His mind reeled. He couldn't think straight. Everything he had worked for, the badge, the authority, the respect, was crumbling before his eyes. He heard the distant rumble of approaching vehicles. Backup. The thought of facing them made his stomach turn. What would they think? What would his fellow officers say when they found out what he had done? There would be no defense, no explanation that would make sense. He had acted in anger, in frustration, and now, it seemed, the entire department would be forced to reckon with the fallout of his decision. The headlights of 2 patrol cars sliced through the darkness as they pulled up behind him. Lawson didn't move. He stood in place, staring out into the empty street, the dread building with every second. 2 officers, a man and a woman, stepped out of the vehicles. Lawson knew them both, had worked with them on countless cases. But tonight, they were strangers. They didn't know what had happened, not yet. And somehow, that made it worse. "Lawson," the male officer called out, his voice calm, though tinged with concern. "What happened?" Lawson didn't answer immediately. His throat felt tight. He could barely get the words out. I made a mistake." The female officer, a seasoned veteran with a sharp eye for detail, stepped forward. "What kind of mistake?" Before Lawson could respond, the radio crackled again. This time, it was from headquarters, and it was loud and clear. "Officer Lawson, you're to report to the precinct immediately. A full investigation is underway. Stand by for further instructions." Lawson's heart skipped a beat. The weight of the words hung in the air, suffocating him. An investigation. He had just been placed under scrutiny. He looked at the two officers before him, their faces unreadable. He could tell they were processing the situation, piecing together what little they knew. But the truth would come out. It always did. "I need to go back to the station," Lawson said quietly. His voice was hollow, almost lost in the night air. "There's no way around it now." The female officer nodded. "We'll follow you," she said. As they climbed back into their cars, Lawson felt a chill settle in the pit of his stomach. The worst part of it all wasn't the slap itself. It wasn't even the video, or the investigation. It was the realization that Evelyn had known this moment was coming. She had been prepared, while he was left scrambling for answers. The drive back to the precinct was a blur of flashing lights and the low hum of the engine. Lawson's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles were white. His mind churned with thoughts of how he could fix this, how he could undo the damage. But deep down, he knew there was no going back. The weight of his actions was suffocating, each passing second tightening the grip around his chest. When they arrived at the precinct, the atmosphere was different. The usual hum of activity had slowed, replaced by an air of tension that hung heavily in the lobby. Officers who normally greeted each other with casual nods or banter now whispered in hushed tones. Lawson could feel their eyes on him, their stares heavy with judgment and suspicion. Word had already spread about the incident, and he knew the gossip would be relentless. His career, his entire life in law enforcement, was already being torn apart. He walked through the halls with his head down, his uniform suddenly feeling too tight, too heavy. He had spent years building up a reputation, doing his job as best as he could. But now, all of that seemed meaningless. He had made one mistake, one colossal error in judgment, and everything he had worked for was crumbling to dust. Inside the small office of his commanding officer, Captain Harris was waiting for him. The older man sat behind his desk, his face unreadable. Lawson took a seat across from him, his palms sweating as he clasped his hands together. "You're lucky it was just a slap," Captain Harris said after a long silence, his voice steady but tinged with disappointment. "This could have gone much worse." Lawson nodded, unable to speak. His throat felt tight, like he was choking on his own guilt. "I don't need to explain to you how serious this is, Lawson," Harris continued. "But I will. Because this is a mistake that goes beyond just a single incident. This is about public trust. This is about the integrity of the department. Do you understand that?" "Yes, sir," Lawson whispered. Harris leaned forward, his eyes locking onto Lawson's. "You crossed a line tonight. And now, you have to live with the consequences. You'll be put on administrative leave while the investigation runs its course. Depending on the findings, your future here will be decided. Do you have anything to say for yourself?" Lawson opened his mouth, but no words came. What could he say? He had no defense. The slap. The video. The investigation. It was all coming down on him, and he had no one to blame but himself. "I've made a mistake, Captain," Lawson finally managed to say, his voice barely a whisper. "I regret it. I don't know what came over me." Harris's expression softened, but only for a moment. "Regret doesn't change anything. You'll have to face the fallout. But I hope you learn something from this. Whatever happens next, remember this, in this line of work, you can't afford to make mistakes like this." The days that followed were a blur of investigations, phone calls, and meetings that dragged on with the relentless weight of the situation hanging over Lawson like a storm cloud. News outlets picked up the story quickly, an officer on duty, caught on tape striking an innocent woman, and the fallout was swift and unforgiving. The video Evelyn had recorded went viral almost immediately. Her calm, steady demeanor as she simply continued walking after being struck, her face a mask of silent defiance, only served to amplify the shock of the incident. News stations played the footage on repeat, while social media erupted with outrage. Hashtags like #JusticeForEvelyn and #UnjustForce trended for days, and before Lawson knew it, the whole country seemed to be talking about him, about what he had done. He could barely look at the screen anymore. Every article, every comment, every post, each one was a reminder of how quickly everything could unravel. The department issued a statement condemning Lawson's actions, calling for a thorough investigation. They distanced themselves from him, claiming that his behavior was not representative of the values they upheld. Lawson could feel the coldness creeping in from all sides, and he couldn't escape it. Evelyn, meanwhile, had become a symbol of strength in the face of injustice. Her name was everywhere. Her video had reached thousands, and people praised her for remaining composed, for standing firm when so many would have reacted with anger or violence. In interviews, she spoke eloquently, but there was no anger in her words, only a calm, unwavering determination that made Lawson feel even smaller. As the investigation progressed, Lawson's fate seemed all but sealed. The evidence was clear. The video was irrefutable. And the public outcry wasn't going to let him slip quietly into the background. One evening, Lawson sat alone in his small apartment, staring at the empty walls. He had never felt more alone in his life. His phone buzzed on the coffee table, pulling him out of his thoughts. He glanced at the screen. It was a message from a fellow officer, Sam Carter, a longtime friend. "Hey, Rick. I just wanted to check in. You all right?" He stared at the message for a long time, fingers hovering over the keys. The truth was, he wasn't all right. He wasn't even close to being all right. But he couldn't bring himself to tell Carter that. Instead, he typed back, "I don't know how to fix this." He hit send before he could overthink it. The phone buzzed again, but this time the response was immediate. "You can't fix it, Rick. Not now. But you need to face it. And you need to understand what this means for you. For all of us." Lawson didn't know how to respond to that. Sam was right. There was no fixing it. He couldn't undo the slap. He couldn't undo the damage. And he certainly couldn't undo the consequences of his actions. But facing it? That part was the hardest. The days blurred into one another, each one dragging on with the weight of uncertainty and guilt hanging over Officer Lawson. He spent most of his time in his apartment, watching the news, waiting for the inevitable. His phone barely rang anymore, and even when it did, it was never with good news. Friends had stopped reaching out, and co-workers avoided eye contact when they passed him in the hallways of the precinct. He had become a pariah, a cautionary tale for everyone who worked in law enforcement. He could feel it in the air every time he walked into a room, the tension, the whispers, the judgment. And the worst part? The worst part was knowing that he had brought it all on himself. His phone buzzed again, and this time it wasn't an officer or a friend, it was an email notification. He opened it hesitantly, not knowing what to expect. It was from the department. Notice of termination pending, Officer Rick Lawson. The email was cold, clinical, detached from the person it was about. It outlined the details of the ongoing investigation, the department's findings, and the expected consequences. They were already in the process of drafting his termination papers, and once the official investigation concluded, the decision would be final. Rick Lawson had failed to uphold the standards of the department. He had failed to protect the community he swore to serve. And now, they were preparing to remove him from the force. The words on the screen blurred as his vision began to swim. His breath caught in his throat. It wasn't real. It couldn't be real. He had lost everything. Lawson stood up and paced around the small apartment. His mind was a cacophony of thoughts, each one louder than the last. He thought about his family, his mother, who had always been proud of him, who had been the first to pin the badge on his chest when he made it through the academy. He thought about the years of service, the people he had helped, the friends he had made. But now, all of it seemed like a distant memory, fading away with each passing second. His eyes fell on the small, framed photograph on the table, his graduation day from the academy. He was standing tall, smiling, full of hope for the future. That man felt like a stranger now. He grabbed the frame, his fingers tightening around it. He wanted to throw it, to shatter it, but he stopped himself. What would that do? Nothing. It wouldn't change what had happened. It wouldn't erase the slap or the video or the public outcry. For the first time since it all started, Lawson sat down. His hands trembled as he placed the photo back on the table, his gaze lingering on it for a moment before he stood and walked toward the door. He wasn't sure where he was going or what he was going to do next. The weight of the world was on his shoulders, and for the first time in a long while, he wasn't sure if he could carry it. The following weeks dragged by in a haze. The investigation was officially concluded, and the public fallout continued to unfold. Evelyn's video had solidified her as a symbol of strength, while Lawson had become the face of everything wrong in law enforcement. The department had already made its stance clear, there was no room for officers who couldn't uphold the integrity of their badge, and Lawson was swiftly discarded. He sat in the small, dimly lit room at the precinct, waiting. The decision was inevitable, and he knew it. His termination was no longer a matter of if, but when. He could already hear the whispers of the higher-ups as they decided what would happen next. His future was now in their hands, and no amount of regret would change that. The door opened with a soft click, and Captain Harris walked in, his face as stern as ever. He didn't sit. There was no need for small talk. Harris simply placed a thick envelope on the table in front of Lawson. The weight of it was heavier than any words he could have said. "Your termination papers are in there, Lawson," Harris said bluntly, his voice devoid of sympathy. "It's done." For a moment, Lawson couldn't move. He had expected this. He had prepared himself for it. But hearing the words out loud still stung, like a punch to the gut. He had spent years in this department, had built a life around it, and now it was all slipping away in an instant. "Is there anything you want to say?" Harris asked, his voice cold, professional. Lawson looked at the envelope, his gaze lingering on the sealed edges. He could feel the weight of his failure, of his actions, and of the career he had lost. He had no defense. He couldn't explain himself. All he could do was nod, slowly, as the finality of it all sank in. "No, sir," Lawson managed to whisper. "I understand." Harris gave him one last look, a look that was more regretful than angry, and turned to leave the room. As the door clicked shut behind him, Lawson was left alone once again. He reached for the envelope, his hands shaking as he tore it open. The papers inside were official, detached, sterile, nothing more than a final administrative decision. He read the words, each one a punch, a reminder of everything he had lost. And as he finished reading, the weight of it all came crashing down. His career was over. There was no going back. Evelyn had won. She had faced down an unjust officer, and in doing so, had forced the system to confront its own failures. Lawson had never imagined that one simple, impulsive action, one slap, could undo everything. But now, in the silence of the room, he understood. The truth wasn't just in the video or the public outcry. It was in the consequences that followed. It was in the loss of everything he had once believed in. He placed the papers down on the desk and stared at them, numb. There was nothing left to say, no excuse to offer. His career had collapsed, and the only thing he could do now was accept the consequences of his actions. And maybe, just maybe, try to rebuild from the wreckage of his own mistakes.